To be honest, the day was a complete disaster from the moment I woke up, to be brutally honest. My whole experience of 7/7 is one of those kind of sliding doors moments where if I do one thing differently, I don't end up where I was that day. I eventually got onto the platform at Romford, jumped on what was supposed to be a fast train to Liverpool Street. There was a signal failure at Stratford, so I got delayed again. Got to Liverpool Street station. I worked in the construction industry, so our staple diet's normally cans of Red Bull and a couple of Mars bars. So instead of buying that like I would have done normally, I just run through the concourse, went through the ticket machine, the barrier machine, coming down the steps onto the Circle line. There was a train there already at the platform. It was packed, so I thought I'll get the next one. So I let that train go. Next one come along 2 or 3 minutes later, jumped on that. At the time, I had a young guy working with me as a site apprentice. As I was a construction manager, so I was training him up to be a site manager. So I had this brilliant idea of typing a text message into my phone, getting off at Baker Street, which is where I would have needed to get my connecting train, run outside the station, send a message, just saying, look, I'm running late, but I'm still coming in. I had a Nokia 3310, so going back a few years, obviously. If you wanted the letter C, you had to push number 2 3 times. I'm a big bloke. It wasn't going very well. When I next looked up, we was at Baker Street and the train was moving, and I just thought, oh no, I've missed my stop. Going back a few stops, when we pulled into King's Cross, I noticed the guy had got on at the front of the carriage. He'd walked down the far end of the carriage, spent a little bit of time there, walked back and sat right next to where I was standing. So I was leaning against one of the poles. As you get onto the carriage, there'd be like the perspex screens. I was leaning against that, and he was sitting in the first seat. He just sat there with a rucksack on his lap, didn't really do anything. As I say, I missed my stop at Baker Street, looked at the tube map, could see that I could get my connecting train from Paddington. So we just pulled into Edgware Road. Few people got off the train. He was still sitting there holding his bag, like millions of people do every single day of the week. Yeah. We pulled out of Edgware Road Station. Just as we hit the sort of bend in the tunnel, I felt like I was being stared at. I looked round, he was staring at me, I stared at him, he leant forward, looked along the carriage, sat back, stared at me, reached into the bag, and there was a big white flash and a massive explosion, and I was blown out of the train.
When you think about that, when you think about the people around you that didn't survive, and when you look back on that day, what are your feelings when it comes to the emotions of it all? I mean, you must think about it every single day. You must think about the people who lost their lives that day every single day. It's a burden that you must carry minute by minute.
Yeah, there's not a day that goes by where I don't think of those people that lost their lives. There's not a day that isn't filled with guilt that I survived and they didn't. There isn't a day that isn't filled with guilt that I couldn't do anything to help these people. When you're in that situation, and you're in absolute abject terror, and I knew how badly hurt I was. I'd been able to feel and kind of get a sense of how badly hurt I was, and a lot of the injured and dying were very close to me. And to not be able to do anything is gut-wrenching, and you know that people are dying around you and you can't do anything to help. I don't know how you ever process that and how you ever live with that. It took me a long time to realise that I was one of those that was dying as well. But there's a part of me that still feels I should have tried to do something, and I'll never get rid of that feeling.
Yeah. Do you feel a debt to all those people who lost their lives to really make sure that anniversaries such as today's is honoured in the way it should be? Often we can be quite stoic as Londoners and look back on tragedy and forget and move on quite quickly with our lives. Other parts of the country perhaps pay more attention to these things and bow their heads for a bit longer. But do you feel like we really need to make sure that those people are honoured in the right way, even on not a milestone one, 17 years?
Absolutely. I think for me, 7/7 as a terrorist attack on this country, it was the first suicide attack ever to take place on British soil. Yeah. And it feels like it's almost forgotten, to be brutally honest. When I look at other tragedies and other attacks that have happened since 7/7, they seem to be remembered. They seem to have a focus on them. When you look at the memorial garden for the Manchester attack, it is a beautiful place. It is very serene. It is very tranquil. If you look at what we got as those involved in 7/7, we got 52 cold steel columns in the middle of a park. It's not somewhere you can go and find a bit of peace or reflect on what's happened or anything. And it just seems to be that 7/7 is, is one that whether it's the government or whatever, don't want to acknowledge it. And I don't understand why. It was the biggest loss of life in a terrorist attack we had. It was the first of its type ever in this country. I'm still living, and thousands of other people are living with the consequences of that day every single day, yet it doesn't get treated or remembered. I mean, last year it didn't even get a mention. It didn't even get mentioned last year. And I think that we owe it to those that lost their lives, to the amazing emergency services that risked their lives to try and help people. We owe them that. That's the least we can do.
Yeah. How have you been since, Dan? How have things unfolded in the years following, in terms of how you've been coping with it, and what have you been doing to help others as well?
To be honest, the first few years I wasn't coping at all. I suffer from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a bit of a no-brainer given what I went through. I really wasn't coping. I tried to mask over it. I tried to pretend that I was fine with it, but I wasn't. It took a long time for me to get the right help. I met an amazing woman who was able to support me and drag me through what was really intensive treatment to get me to a point of realizing that I had a life and I had something to look forward to, and I had a way forward. So really, when I look back on 7/7, there's kind of the guys that saved me in the tunnel, there's the emergency services, and there's this young woman who's now my wife who absolutely, literally saved me. So it gave me a foundation to build on. And since that day, prior to getting injured, I never understood disability. I never knew anybody that was disabled. I never knew what the impacts of it would be. And then when I got my disability, I was in for a really rude awakening. So I've dedicated the work that I do to try and create opportunities and equity in the opportunities for disabled people, to show that disability doesn't have to be the end. It's a start of something new. And there's so many positives that we can take from it, in terms of the way that somebody is and the way that they deal with situations and they handle issues. Our processes for problem solving is different. So there's a whole myriad of ways of putting more positivity around having a disability. It's not easy. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is a life choice, because it certainly isn't, but it's something I don't have a choice in, so I have to make the best of it. And I'm trying to do that and help as many people with disabilities as I can that either have a disability or will acquire a disability. I certainly never want anybody to feel the way that I did after I got hurt.
Yeah, it's often about finding the lowest points, the real darkest moments, and trying to mould that into something positive when it comes to these things. And you're a testament to the kind of people that have to do that, I suppose. Daniel, tell us a little bit about your wife as well. You mentioned you kind of came together through this.
Yeah, we met kind of late 2013, purely by fluke. But it was one of those situations that once I'd spoken to her and once I'd spoken to her, I knew that she was the one, and we then met up. And I think one of the things that I always struggled with my PTSD is I always used to say to her, I'm as broken as you can get. I mean, there's no coming back from this. And I never forget, she looked me dead in the eyes and she said, look, it's not about who you are now. It's about who I see you can be in those little snippets of good times. That's who I know you can be, and that's where we're gonna work to get. She didn't have to do that. Plenty of people had turned their back on it and hadn't wanted to engage. And she just grabbed it with both hands and went, no, we'll do this together. And literally every day since I met her, she's been right by my side through the most difficult and horrendous times possible. As you can imagine, this time of year is incredibly tough for me, but she doesn't waver or falter in any way, shape or form. She's there the whole way through. So with the guys, Adrian and Lee, that were, one was a passenger and one was an off-duty train driver that saved me in the tunnel, the emergency services, the hospital staff, and now my wife, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. I really wouldn't. I'd given up all hope of having any form of life.
Daniel, thank you very much for talking to me today and for sharing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.